Proctor Vex-9 adjusted his 3 eye stalks and checked the chronometer for the 15th time in as many seconds. The examination hall stretched before him like a monument to academic suffering, that he filled with the galaxy's most brilliant minds and one very average-looking human who had somehow wandered into the wrong building. Again, attention, candidates. Vex-9's voice echoed through the chamber, causing several Zephyrian scholars to flutter their wing membranes nervously. You have before you the quantum paradox examination. This test has stumped our greatest theorists for over 2 centuries. No being has ever completed it. Many have tried. All have failed spectacularly. The human Marcus Thompson, according to his registration chip, raised his hand. Vex-9 sighed, a sound like deflating plasma bags. Yes, candidate Thompson. Excuse me, sir. I think there's been a mistake. I'm just here for the basic interspecies communication certificate. You know, the one that lets me work at the spaceport gift shop. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. The Etherean prince in the front row, Zelos the Magnificent, turned his translucent head so fast it nearly spun completely around. The Corvan delegation exchanged horrified clicks in their native tongue. Impossible, muttered Dr. Zan the Silvermore, the renowned Centaurian physicist. Only candidates with a minimum IQ of 800 are permitted in this examination. Vex-9 consulted his datapad, his eye stalks drooping with each line he read. According to our records, Mr. Thompson, you scored, let me see here, 127 on your cognitive assessment. That's above average for humans, Marcus protested, looking genuinely pleased with himself. The room fell silent, except for the gentle humming of the anti-gravity platforms keeping the more ethereal species aloft. Vex-9 felt all 6 of his heart skip a beat simultaneously, a medical condition that had sent many of his species to early graves. Mr. Thompson, Vex-9 said slowly, as if speaking to a particularly dim crystal formation, the average IQ in this room is approximately 1,247. You are, mathematically speaking, the intellectual equivalent of a decorative pebble. Marcus shrugged. Well, I'm here now. Might as well give it a shot, right? The Corvan delegation began what could only be described as hysterical chittering. Prince Zelos fainted, his translucent form shimmering as it hit the floor. Dr. Silvermore started calculating the probability of universal collapse due to sheer stupidity entering the examination hall. Very well, Vex-9 said, his voice carrying the weight of impending doom. But I must warn you, this examination has driven lesser minds to madness. Literally. We have a whole wing in the psychiatric facility dedicated to candidates who attempted question 7. What's question 7 about? Marcus asked with the innocent curiosity of someone who had never encountered a mathematical concept more advanced than calculating tip percentages. The nature of existence itself, compressed into a single equation that must be solved using only theoretical constructs that don't technically exist yet. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Sounds fun. Vex-9 began distributing the examination materials, each packet sealed with quantum locks that required PhD-level comprehension just to open. The first candidate to receive theirs was Quantum Lord Nexus, a being of pure energy from the void sector whose mere presence caused reality to hiccup occasionally. Remember, Vex-9 announced, you have exactly 4 hours to complete this examination. The record for most questions attempted is 3, achieved by the legendary Dr. Cosmos Brightwing, who subsequently spent 6 months in intensive therapy talking to imaginary numbers. Marcus raised his hand again. Do we get scratch paper? Mr. Thompson, most candidates require specialized computing matrices capable of processing thoughts at near light speed. You're asking about paper? Yeah, you know, the stuff made from trees? Sometimes I like to draw little diagrams when I'm thinking. The Zephyrian scholars began molting from stress. Their delicate feathers drifted down like snow, creating what would have been a beautiful scene if not for the academic horror unfolding before them. Begin, Vex-9 said weakly, activating the examination protocols. The hall filled with the sounds of intense concentration, the low thrumming of Nexus's energy field, the rapid clicking of Corvan calculation appendages, the soft chiming of Centaurian neural networks operating at maximum capacity. And then there was Marcus humming what sounded suspiciously like an ancient Earth tune while he read the first question. Question 1 appeared on everyone's display simultaneously, using the principles of trans-dimensional physics that prove that infinity can be both absolute and relative while maintaining the paradox of existence within a closed temporal loop. Dr. Silvermore immediately began constructing a mental framework involving 17 different theoretical models. Prince Zelos, having recovered from his fainting spell, started channeling pure mathematical concepts through his crystalline consciousness. The Carvens formed a calculation cluster, their hive mind working in perfect synchronization. Marcus looked at the question, scratched his head, and wrote something down. After exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds, he raised his hand. "Professor? Proctor? Sir? I think there might be a typo in question 1. The sound of styluses dropping could be heard throughout the hall. Vex 9's middle eye stalk twitched, a sure sign of impending nervous breakdown. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Well, it says here prove that infinity can be both absolute and relative, but that's kind of like asking someone to prove that wet water is dry water, isn't it? I mean, if infinity is absolute, then by definition it can't be relative, and vice versa. So either the question is asking us to prove something impossible, or there's a logical error in the premise." The hall went so quiet that the background radiation of the universe became audible. Dr. Silvermore's advanced neural network actually crashed and had to be rebooted. Prince Zelos turned several shades of transparent that didn't technically exist in normal space-time. "Are you," Vex 9's voice came out as barely a whisper, "are you suggesting that the question is flawed?" "I'm just saying maybe whoever wrote this was having an off day. It happens to everyone. Last week I meant to order a coffee and accidentally asked for a sentient plant instead." Quantum Lord Nexus flickered with what could only be described as confused energy patterns. The Zephyrians had stopped molting and were staring at Marcus with something approaching religious awe. The Carven's hive mind had temporarily fragmented as individual members tried to process what they were hearing. "Mr. Thompson," Vex 9 said very carefully, "this examination was written by the combined efforts of the galaxy's top 50 theorists. It took them 3 years just to formulate question 1. "Oh wow, really? 3 years? That's a long time to spend on one question." "What did they do? Have committee meetings about every comma?" Several candidates began laughing, not the polite academic chuckling one might expect, but the kind of hysterical laughter that comes from realizing you've spent your entire life overthinking problems that might not actually be problems at all. "I mean," Marcus continued, apparently oblivious to the existential crisis he was causing, "sometimes the simplest answer is the right one, you know. My grandfather used to say, if you're trying to put your pants on and it's not working, maybe you're putting them on your head." Prince Zelos began making a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. Dr. Silvermore was frantically recalculating her entire worldview. The Corvan delegation had formed a perfect circle and were clicking in what appeared to be a mathematical prayer. Vex 9 looked at his chronometer. 4 minutes had passed since the examination began, and already his carefully constructed academic universe was crumbling around him like a poorly built sandcastle in a tsunami. "Mr. Thompson," he said with the patience of someone explaining quantum mechanics to a houseplant, "perhaps you should attempt to answer the question as written, regardless of any perceived philosophical concerns." "Oh, sure thing," Marcus said cheerfully. He wrote something else down, then raised his hand again. He'd done with question 1. "Done?" Vex 9's voice cracked like a teenage Vulcarian going through metamorphosis. "It's been 5 minutes. Yeah, once I realized the question was basically asking me to explain a logical impossibility, the answer became pretty obvious." Marcus turned his paper around so Vex 9 could see it. In simple, neat handwriting it read, "This question cannot be answered as written because it contains a logical paradox." The answer is therefore that there is no answer, which paradoxically is an answer. Please see attached diagram. Below this was a drawing that looked suspiciously like a smiley face with mathematical symbols for eyes. Vex 9 stared at the paper for a full 30 seconds. Then he did something he hadn't done in his 47 years of academic life. He started giggling. Not the refined chuckle of intellectual superiority, but actual, genuine giggles. "He's right," Vex 9 said to no one in particular. "By all the quantum fluctuations in the universe, the human is absolutely right." The effect on the examination hall was immediate and dramatic. Dr. Silvermore stood up so fast her anti-gravity platform wobbled dangerously. Prince Zelos began glowing with what could only be described as enlightened confusion. The Corvan delegation disbanded their calculation cluster and started clicking in what sounded like applause. "Question 2. Marcus announced, apparently having moved on without waiting for official confirmation. Using non-linear temporal mathematics, calculate the exact moment when cause becomes effect in a universe where time flows backwards. This question had historically taken candidates anywhere from 6 months to several years to even approach. The current record holder, Professor Infinity Brightside, had spent 2 decades on it before concluding that mathematics itself needed to be reinvented. Marcus read it, tapped his pencil against his teeth a few times, and wrote something down. "Hey, Proctor, sir. This one's got the same problem as the first one." Vex 9 felt his remaining sanity, preparing to pack its bags and emigrate to a simpler dimension. "What problem would that be, Mr. Thompson?" "Well, if time flows backwards, then effect would come before cause, right? So cause never actually becomes effect, effect becomes cause. It's like asking when yesterday becomes tomorrow when you're living in reverse. The question is asking for a moment that can't exist." The silence that followed was so profound that several candidates began to question whether sound itself was a meaningful concept. "So what did you write?" Vex 9 asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wrote that the answer is never because the premise makes the question impossible to answer correctly." Then I drew a clock going backwards with a confused face on it. He held up his paper. Indeed, there was a clock with its hands moving counterclockwise and what appeared to be a very puzzled expression drawn on its face. Quantum Lord Nexus suddenly flared with brilliant energy. "The human has identified the fundamental flaw in post-classical temporal theory." His voice boomed across dimensions. "We have been attempting to solve unsolvable problems." Dr. Silvermore began laughing so hard she had to sit down. 43 years of advanced study, she gasped between chuckles, and I've been trying to answer questions that were designed to be unanswerable. Prince Zelos had achieved a new level of transparency that allowed everyone to see his internal organs, which were apparently shaped like geometric equations. "The humans," he said in wonder, "they think in straight lines while we think in spirals. Sometimes straight lines are exactly what you need." Marcus looked around the room with growing concern. Is everyone okay? You all seem kind of, I don't know, stressed?" "Maybe we should take a break." I brought sandwiches. He reached into a brown paper bag and pulled out what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil. "Anyone want half a peanut butter and jelly?" "I made extra because my mum always said it's good to share." The Corvan delegation immediately surrounded him, clicking excitedly. Apparently they had never encountered the concept of sharing food with strangers and found it fascinating from an anthropological standpoint. "Mr. Thompson," Vex 9 said slowly, "how many questions have you completed?" Marcus counted on his fingers. 2 down and I'm working on number 3. This one's about proving that consciousness can exist independently of matter while maintaining coherent thought patterns across multiple dimensional planes. And it's another trick question. If consciousness exists independently of matter, then it can't maintain coherent thought patterns because thought patterns require some kind of structural framework, which would be matter. So the question is asking us to prove something self-contradictory. He showed his paper again. This time he had drawn what appeared to be a ghost trying to think, with thought bubbles containing question marks. Vex 9 sat down heavily in his proctoring chair, which creaked ominously under the weight of his existential crisis. "Mr. Thompson, are you telling me that every question on this examination, the most difficult academic challenge in the known galaxy, is based on logical impossibilities?" "Well, I'm only on question 3, but so far, yeah. It's like someone took a bunch of really smart ideas and mashed them together without checking if they actually made sense when combined. Kind of like trying to make a sandwich with ingredients that don't exist." The examination hall had transformed into something resembling a philosophical support group. Dr. Silvermore was comforting Prince Zelos, who was flickering between several states of transparency. The Zephyrians had formed a circle and were singing what sounded like a mourning song for their abandoned doctoral theses. The Corvan delegation was sharing Marcus's sandwiches and appeared to be having the time of their lives. Question 4. Marcus announced cheerfully, apparently immune to the academic apocalypse he was causing. Define the mathematical relationship between something that never existed and something that always existed, while proving neither actually exists. He read it again, frowning slightly. "Okay, this one's just mean. It's like asking someone to describe the color of invisible while proving that colors don't exist." Vex 9 watched in fascination as Marcus wrote his answer and drew another small diagram. This one appeared to be two confused stick figures shrugging at each other, and moved on to question 5. Question 5, Marcus read aloud, using pure logic. Prove that pure logic cannot exist. He paused, tapping his pencil again. "Well, that's easy. If pure logic cannot exist, then any proof using pure logic would be invalid because it's using something that doesn't exist. But if pure logic can exist, then the statement pure logic cannot exist is false. Which means the question is asking us to prove a false statement. Either way, it's impossible." He drew what appeared to be a logic symbol eating its own tail. By now, word had spread throughout the academic complex. Professors were abandoning their classes to witness the human who was single-handedly dismantling centuries of theoretical framework. Graduate students were live-streaming the event. The university bookstore had already started selling T-shirts that read, "I survived the Thompson examination." Questions 6 and 7 are about the same thing, Marcus continued, apparently having developed superhuman reading speed. "They want me to prove that knowledge can exist without knowing, and that unknowing can create absolute knowledge. But if you don't know something, you can't know that you don't know it, because not knowing that you don't know would mean you actually do know something about not knowing. Which means you do know something which contradicts the premise." He drew two more diagrams. One appeared to be a brain with a question mark for a face. The other was just a series of confused squiggles. Vex 9 looked at his chronometer again. 7 minutes had passed since the examination began. 7 minutes. And 2. Tire. Marcus Thompson, the human with an IQ of 127, who thought he was taking a test for a gift shop job, had just solved what was supposed to be an impossible examination by proving that it was, in fact, impossible. "Mr. Thompson," Vex 9 said, his voice filled with something between awe and terror, "you've just completed the quantum paradox examination." "Really? Sweet. Do I pass?" The question hung in the air like a mathematical equation waiting to be solved. Around the room, some of the galaxy's greatest minds were having what could only be described as intellectual nervous breakdowns. And in the center of it all sat Marcus Thompson, holding half a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and waiting to find out if he could work at a spaceport gift shop. Vex 9 realized that he was about to do something that would either revolutionize galactic education, get him fired from the most prestigious academic institution in known space, possibly both. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his 3 eye stalks focusing on the human with laser-like intensity, "how would you feel about taking another examination?" Marcus looked around the increasingly chaotic examination hall, sandwich still in hand, and shrugged. "Sure, I guess I could take another test. But first, could someone maybe explain what just happened? Everyone seems really excited about something." Vex 9 felt his life flash before his eye stalks. 47 years of academic dedication, 3 advanced degrees in quantum pedagogy, and a spotless record of maintaining proper examination protocols. All about to be thrown out the airlock because of one cheerful human with the intellectual subtlety of a plasma torpedo. Mr. Thompson, Vex 9 began carefully, you have just accomplished something that our greatest minds considered impossible. You solved the quantum paradox examination. Oh, cool. So I can work at the gift shop now? Dr. Silvermore stopped her hysterical laughter long enough to stare at Marcus with something approaching religious reverence. Gift shop, young human, you've just rewritten the fundamental principles of theoretical academia. That sounds way more complicated than selling tourist souvenirs, Marcus replied, looking genuinely concerned. I just want a job where I can recommend good snacks to travelers. Prince Zelos had achieved a level of transparency that was making nearby students queasy. The human speaks wisdom. Perhaps we have been overcomplicating the simple act of existence. The Corvan delegation, having finished Marcus's sandwiches, began clicking in what their universal translator rendered as philosophical epiphany mixed with mild indigestion. Mr. Thompson, Vex 9 said, his voice carrying the weight of impending bureaucratic nightmare, I'm afraid I must ask you to take the Advanced Universal Theory examination. Is that longer than the first one? Because I'm supposed to meet my friend Dave at the food court in 20 minutes. We're going to try that new Centaurian ice cream place. The mention of ice cream caused several candidates to faint. The concept of someone treating world-changing academic achievement as a minor delay before frozen dairy consumption was beyond their processing capabilities. The second examination, Vex 9 continued, consulting his data pad with shaking appendages, consists of problems that have stumped our civilization for over 500 years. No living being has ever attempted more than one question. How many questions are there? 50. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Okay, but I'm going to need more sandwiches. Problem solving makes me hungry. Within minutes, the examination hall had transformed into something resembling a cross between an academic conference and a carnival. Word had spread beyond the university complex, and beings from across the sector were arriving to witness what the local news networks were calling the Great Human Revelation or the Day Logic Died, depending on which channel you watched. Dean Cosmic Flutterworth, a distinguished ethereal whose very presence caused nearby objects to achieve enlightenment, materialized in the front of the hall with a sound like wind chimes having an existential crisis. Proctor Vex 9, Dean Flutterworth's voice resonated across 17 dimensions simultaneously. I understand we have a situation requiring immediate administrative attention. Yes, Dean. The human has, well, he's broken our examination system. Marcus waved cheerfully at the Dean. Hi there. Sorry about the trouble. I didn't mean to break anything. Is this like when I accidentally programmed the coffee machine to speak ancient Latin? Because that was totally an accident. Dean Flutterworth's ethereal form flickered with what could only be described as confused authority. Mr. Thompson, your actions today have created the largest paradigm shift in galactic education since the great rethinking of 2847. The what now? Never mind. The point is, you've exposed fundamental flaws in our most cherished academic traditions. The university board is demanding either your immediate expulsion or your immediate appointment as head of theoretical paradox studies. Marcus looked around the room where various species were still processing their shattered worldviews. Can I pick a third option? Like maybe just getting my gift shop certificate and pretending this never happened. The collective gasp from the assembled academics was audible from 3 floors up. Professor Stella Moonbeam, a renowned vegan theoretical physicist who had arrived via emergency teleportation, clutched her crystalline heart. Young human, she said in a voice like tinkling silver bells having a nervous breakdown, you cannot simply walk away from revolutionizing science. Watch me, Marcus said with the confidence of someone who had never met a problem he couldn't ignore until it went away. Vex 9 realized that he was standing at the crossroads of academic history. In one direction lay tradition, order, and the comfortable certainty of unsolvable problems. In the other direction lay chaos, enlightenment, and a human who treated paradigm shifts like minor inconveniences. "The Advanced Universal Theory examination," he announced, his voice echoing through the hall, "will now commence." The second test materialized on everyone's displays simultaneously. The first question appeared in letters that seemed to burn with the intensity of dying stars. "Prove that existence requires non-existence while demonstrating that non-existence cannot exist without existence, using only concepts that transcend both existence and non-existence." Marcus read it twice, scratched his head and looked up. Proctor, sir? This question is basically asking me to prove that something needs its opposite to exist, but then saying I can't use either thing to prove it. That's like asking someone to describe color using only things that aren't colors. He wrote something down and moved to question 2. By this point, the examination hall had been declared a temporary zone of academic emergency. The Galactic Education Council had dispatched their finest minds to observe the proceedings. News crews from 17 different species were broadcasting live coverage. Someone had set up a betting pool on how many questions Marcus would solve before either achieving enlightenment or causing the collapse of organized education. Question 2, Marcus read aloud for the benefit of the growing crowd. We define the mathematical relationship between infinity and zero, while proving that mathematics itself is a construct that cannot accurately describe mathematical relationships. He paused, tapping his pencil. Okay, so if mathematics can't describe mathematical relationships, then any mathematical definition would be meaningless. But the question is asking for a mathematical definition using mathematics that the question says doesn't work. It's like asking someone to draw a picture using colors that don't exist. The sound of styluses dropping had become a constant background noise, like rain on a metal roof during an academic thunderstorm. Marcus continued through questions 3, 4, and 5 with the methodical efficiency of someone reading a grocery list. Each answer followed the same pattern: identify the logical impossibility, explain why the question couldn't be answered as written, draw a small diagram that somehow captured the essence of intellectual absurdity. Question 6, he announced, having apparently developed immunity to the sound of minds being blown. Calculate the precise moment when knowledge becomes ignorance in a universe where learning makes you forget what you knew before learning it. Oh, come on, Marcus said with the exasperated tone of someone who had reached his limit of logical nonsense. If learning makes you forget what you knew before, then you can't actually calculate anything because the act of learning the calculation would make you forget how to calculate. This is just silly now. He drew what appeared to be a brain chasing its own tail in circles. Dean Flutterworth had achieved a state of ethereal agitation previously thought impossible. His normally serene energy patterns were fluctuating like a broken hologram. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his multi-dimensional voice cracking, "you are systematically deconstructing the intellectual foundation of our civilization." "Sorry about that," Marcus replied, sounding genuinely apologetic. "I really just wanted to sell keychains and maybe some of those little snow globes with spaceships in them." By question 15, the examination hall had been declared a historical landmark. By question 25, 3 different species had proposed making Marcus their spiritual leader. By question 35, the university board had convened an emergency session to decide whether to award him every degree they had ever offered or exile him to a dimension where logic didn't exist. Question 47, Marcus read, his voice now accompanied by the collective held breath of thousands of observers. Using pure thought, prove that pure thought cannot produce pure results while maintaining the purity of impure thoughts about pure impurity. Marcus stared at the question for a full 10 seconds, the longest he had spent on any single problem. "Okay," he said finally, "I think whoever wrote these questions might have been having some kind of breakdown. This one doesn't even make sense in a way that doesn't make sense. It's like nonsense pretending to be profound nonsense." He wrote, "This question appears to have been generated by randomly combining philosophical terms. The answer is that random word combinations do not constitute meaningful questions. Then he drew a picture of what looked like words having an argument with each other. Questions 48 and 49 fell with the same casual efficiency. Marcus had developed a rhythm now, reading each question, identifying its fundamental logical flaws, providing a sensible explanation of why it couldn't be answered, and adding increasingly creative diagrams. Finally, he reached question 50. The hall fell completely silent. Even the background hum of the anti-gravity systems seemed to quiet in anticipation. This was the question that had allegedly driven 3 separate civilizations to abandon higher education entirely. Question 50, Marcus read, his voice carrying clearly through the absolute silence. Prove that this question cannot be answered while answering it completely, using an answer that demonstrates why no answer is possible, thereby creating an answer from the absence of answers. Marcus looked at the question. Then he looked around the room at thousands of expectant faces, eye stalks, energy patterns, and various other forms of sensory apparatus. Well, he said with the tone of someone who had just realized something obvious, that's easy. The collective intake of breath from the assembled crowd could have powered a small space station. If the question is asking me to prove it can't be answered while answering it, then the act of providing any response proves that it can be answered, which makes the premise false. But if I don't answer it, then I'm not following the instructions, which means I'm not answering it completely. So the only way to answer it completely is to point out that the question contradicts itself, which means the answer is that the question is self-defeating. He wrote his response, then added his final diagram, a question mark looking at itself in a mirror and appearing confused. And done, Marcus announced cheerfully. 50 questions, 50 answers, and I've still got 5 minutes to meet Dave for ice cream. The silence that followed was so profound that several philosophers later claimed it achieved a state of pure quiet that they spent years trying to recreate. Then Dean Flutterworth began to laugh. Not the refined chuckle of academic appreciation, but deep, genuine laughter that resonated across multiple dimensions and caused several nearby students to temporarily exist in a state of enlightened confusion. Mr. Thompson. Dean Flutterworth said between fits of multi-dimensional giggling, in 57 minutes, you have solved every impossible examination in our catalogue, exposed the fundamental absurdity of our most cherished academic traditions, and revolutionized the way we think about thinking itself. Cool, Marcus said, packing up his pencils. So, can I get my gift shop certificate now? The crowd erupted. Some beings cheered, others wept. A few achieved spontaneous enlightenment. The Corvan delegation began clicking in what sounded like a standing ovation. Prince Zelos had become so transparent he was essentially invisible, which he claimed was a new state of philosophical clarity. Professor Moonbeam floated forward, her crystalline form shimmering with excitement. Mr. Thompson, the Galactic University system would like to offer you a position as Supreme Director of Applied Common Sense. What does that job pay? Enough to buy every gift shop in the sector. Marcus considered this for exactly 3 seconds. Can I still sell snacks to tourists? You can sell snacks to entire civilizations if you want. And I get vacation time. You can vacation on planets that exist solely for the purpose of your relaxation. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Okay, but I want it in writing. And I want Dave to be my assistant. He's really good at organizing things, and he makes excellent sandwiches. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with the excitement of witnessing academic history, Vex 9 approached Marcus with something resembling newfound respect. Mr. Thompson, he said, his 3 eye stalks focusing intently, may I ask you one final question? Sure thing, Proctor, sir. How did you know? How did you see what thousands of brilliant minds missed? Marcus finished packing his pencils and looked thoughtful for a moment. I guess it's like my grandfather always said, sometimes the smartest thing you can do is admit when something doesn't make sense. Everyone else was trying so hard to be smart that they forgot to be sensible. He stood up, brushing sandwich crumbs off his shirt. Plus, I figured if a question seems impossible, maybe it's because it actually is impossible. Not everything that sounds smart actually is smart. As Marcus walked toward the exit, the assembled academics watched in stunned silence. Here was a being who had just rewritten the rules of intellectual achievement, and he was treating it like he had just helped someone change a flat tire useful, but nothing to get excited about. Oh, and Proctor. Marcus called back from the doorway. Next time you write an exam, maybe try asking questions that actually have answers. It makes the whole process a lot more fun for everyone. And with that, Marcus Thompson, former aspiring gift shop employee, current Supreme Director of Applied Common Sense, walked out of the examination hall and into galactic history, leaving behind a room full of the universe's greatest minds who were all wondering why they had spent their lives trying to solve problems that didn't actually need solving. The revolution had begun with a human, a handful of sandwiches, and the radical idea that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from simply asking, "But does this actually make sense?" As it turned out, it was exactly the kind of revolution the galaxy needed.